The 9,929th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. I should like to take this opportunity to pay tribute on behalf of the Council to His Excellency Mr. Evangelos Sekiris, Permanent Representative of Greece, for his service as President of the Council for the month of May. I'm sure I speak for all members of the Council in expressing deep appreciation to Ambassador Sekiris and his team for the great diplomatic skill with which they conducted the Council's business last month. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Israel and Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in the meeting in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2025/353, the text of a draft resolution submitted by Algeria, Denmark, Greece, Guyana, Pakistan, Panama, the Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, and Somalia. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements before the vote. I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak and introduce the resolution on behalf of the 10 elected members: Algeria, Denmark, Greece, Guyana, Panama, Pakistan, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Somalia, and my own country, Slovenia. The resolution before us was, as on previous occasions, prompted by our deep concern over the catastrophic situation in Gaza, which deteriorated further after the resumption of hostilities in March. We have heard numerous briefings in this Council, from those of the Secretary General and USG Fletcher on the broader humanitarian situation, to those of people working on the ground. We are also seized of the daily briefings provided by the UN system and the humanitarian community, and follow closely the deeply disturbing reports coming from the ground, including in relation to the functioning of the newly established aid distribution centers. We continue to fully support the ongoing diplomatic efforts by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar aimed at achieving a return to the ceasefire deal. We firmly believe that this Council must also act urgently and decisively to address the humanitarian situation in Gaza in accordance with its mandate for the maintenance of international peace and security. The resolution before us is a product of consultations among all Council members. We thank delegations for their constructive engagement and flexibility that has allowed us to develop a text that responds to the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. We believe this text reflects the consensus shared by all Council members that the war in Gaza has to come to an immediate halt, and all hostages must be immediately and unconditionally released, and civilians in Gaza must not starve and must have full and unimpeded access to aid. It is for this reason that we have prepared a concise draft humanitarian resolution expressing grave concern over the situation in Gaza, including the risk of famine, and reaffirming that all parties must comply with their obligations under international law. It further expresses support to the efforts of mediators to immediately bring parties back to implementing the ceasefire agreement in line with Resolution 2735 of this Council. Importantly, the resolution also demands an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, respected by all parties. It also recalls the demand of the Council for immediate, dignified, and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas and other groups. The draft also contains an unequivocal demand for the immediate and unconditional lifting of all restrictions on the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza, its safe and unhindered distribution at scale, including by the UN and humanitarian partners throughout the Gaza Strip, as well as the restoration of all essential services in line with international humanitarian law, the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence, and the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. Madam President, on behalf of 10 elected members, we ask all delegations for their support for this urgent demand in line with this Council's responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, the U.S. opposition to this resolution should come as no surprise. It is unacceptable for what it does say. It is unacceptable for what it does not say. And it is unacceptable for the manner in which it has been advanced. The United States has been clear. We would not support any measure that fails to condemn Hamas and does not call for Hamas to disarm and leave Gaza. In recent months, Hamas has rejected numerous ceasefire proposals, including one over the weekend, that would provide a pathway to end this conflict and release the remaining 58 hostages. We cannot allow the Security Council to reward Hamas's intransigence. After all, it was Hamas who started this brutal conflict on October 7th, 2023, when Hamas perpetrated the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Hamas has sustained it ever since in a manner that threatens Israel's security and prolongs Palestinian anguish. It is Hamas that continues to threaten Israelis and puts Palestinian civilians in Gaza in harm's way every day, using them as human shields. They have brutally suppressed those brave enough to challenge its despotic rule. It is inexplicable that many members of this council still refuse to acknowledge that Hamas could end this conflict tomorrow by surrendering and laying down its arms. It is unconscionable that the UN still has not labeled and sanctioned Hamas as a terrorist organization. In addition to refusing once again to condemn Hamas for the cowardly and evil acts that set this brutal conflict into motion, this resolution contains other serious defects. The United States has taken the very clear position since this conflict began that Israel has a right to defend itself, which includes defeating Hamas and ensuring they are never again in a position to threaten Israel. In this regard, any product that undermines our close ally Israel's security is a non-starter. This resolution would undermine diplomatic efforts to reach a ceasefire that reflects the realities on the ground and emboldens Hamas. This resolution also draws false equivalence between Israel and Hamas, which is both wrong and dangerous. This resolution seeks an, and I quote, immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire, close quote, that would leave Hamas in a position to carry out future October 7th attacks, as it has promised. This resolution refuses to acknowledge the disastrous shortcomings of the prior method of aid delivery, which allowed Hamas to enrich itself at the expense of Palestinians and failed to get food and water to those who needed it most. No one wants to see Palestinian civilians in Gaza go hungry or thirsty. We instead urge the UN and NGOs to support the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to help it safely deliver aid without being diverted by Hamas. the GHF has emphasized it will deliver aid consistent with the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. Colleagues, we've been clear that in order to move forward, Hamas and other terrorists must have no future in Gaza. As Secretary Rubio has said, if an ember survives, it will spark again into a fire. This council should use its power to pressure Hamas to accept the proposal on the table. Only after the terror group's removal can Israel be secure within its own borders, and can Gaza advance toward a brighter and more prosperous future. The United States has worked tirelessly with Egypt and Qatar to bring an end to this horrific conflict for the sake of the region's people. They want a path forward with opportunity and the prospect of a better tomorrow. Israelis yearn for a future where they aren't threatened by daily rocket barrages and other acts of terrorism. Palestinians deserve an opportunity to rebuild their lives, free of Iran and the influence of its insidious terrorist proxies. Rather than push forward a resolution that unjustly rewards terrorism, undermines negotiations, and allows Tehran to continue fomenting instability, let's instead demand that Hamas surrender, disarm, and leave Gaza forever, for the sake of all the region's people. Moreover, we need to be perfectly clear. Performative actions in this council designed to draw a veto, as evidenced by the process of formulating this resolution, wherein there was no true negotiation, are harmful at a time when there is delicate diplomacy going on in the region to reach a ceasefire. Further, engaging in this performative process at a time when serious questions are being asked about the utility of the UN, its funding, and use of resources is shameful. This council should not be used in this way. This council must hold itself to a higher standard. Meanwhile, we've had our negotiators on the ground trying to hammer out a real agreement to get hostages released, get a ceasefire, and provide humanitarian assistance. Finally, the United States will never stop working to free all the hostages, including the remains of 4 Americans murdered by Hamas, who have now been held in squalid conditions for 607 days. They will not be left behind. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S 2025/353 please raise their hand? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 0 abstention. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Madam President, at the outset, we express our warmest congratulations to Guyana for assuming the presidency of the Council during this month. We want to commend also the Greek efficient presidency of the Council during the last month. Madam President, during our last meeting held on the 20th of May, I spoke with length of Dr. Ala al-Najjar. Remember, the mother whose name is now imprinted in the wound of every Palestinian soul. 9 of her 10 children were taken, not by fate, but by the deliberate fire of the Israeli occupying army. Remember, I asked then if her husband, Hamdi, awakens, what we shall tell him. Today we know he will never speak again. He will never hear again. He is gone. Dr. Hamdi succumbed to his wounds last Sunday. And that unbearable question will never cross his lips, nor Allah will bear the agony of answering it. And now, the last surviving is Adam, a 10-year-old suspended between life and the memory of what once was a happy family. We pray he recovers. We pray that he becomes a balm to his mother's shattered heart. Madam President, there are moments when silence is more eloquent than language. Today is one of those moments. But silence cannot defend the dead. It cannot hold the hand of the dying. It cannot confront the machinery of injustice. So we must speak loudly, not for the sake of mere stating position, but for the sake of memory, of morality, and of the human spirit. This meeting of the Security Council, this humanitarian resolution, even in its obstruction by a veto, is a mirror that reflects the agony of multilateralism and the urgent need to revive it. Today, the elected members of the Council have stood with clarity, with conviction, with courage. They are the proud bearer of moral legitimacy. They are the true compass of the world's conscience. The draft resolution that was halted today was not the voice of a few, but the collective will of the entire world, north and south, east and west, 14 out of 15 Security Council members. It was a message to the people of Palestine. You are not alone. You are not alone. And it was a message to the Israeli occupier. The world watched you. The shield of impunity, of immunity, must fall. It reveals why the Israeli occupier continues its crime. Because it has never fully fared justice. Because it has always felt protected. While the victims were buried with no names, no headlines, no reckoning, no investigation, and no accountability. Madam President, for the killing of children, for the killing of Palestinian children, to not become a mere pastime, the Council should have acted to impose a ceasefire in Gaza. For the starvation not to be legitimized as a weapon, the Council should have acted to impose a ceasefire in Gaza. For the future generations to not grow up scorning international law, the Council should have acted to impose a ceasefire in Gaza. Madam President, today's vote is not a conclusion. It is another prelude. It is another beginning. As President Abdelmajid Tebboune has affirmed, Algeria will not abandon Palestine. We have stood with it in its pain, and we will stand with it in its resurrection. We will return to this Council again and again. We will return for the children who died before they knew what childhood meant. We will return for the women forced to give birth on roads lined with rubbers and flame. We will return for the fathers who built homes with bare hands, only to watch them collapse in seconds. We will return for the starving who refuse to trade dignity for bread beneath siege. We will return for the thirsty, killed for looking for clean water. We will return because the Palestinians deserve to live in freedom, in dignity. We are not tired. We are not resigned. We will come back, and soon. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, this week we surpassed yet another painful milestone. 3 months since Israel imposed grave restrictions on humanitarian aid entering Gaza. While this Council has been briefed time and time again of the cost of inaction, the risk of famine has continued to grow. As always, it is civilians who suffer the most. We've all seen the chaotic scenes at the recently set up aid distribution sites, and we deplore the killing of civilians trying to get life-saving aid. we've seen the sheer desperation, the human cost of months of severe restrictions on humanitarian aid. Madam President, Denmark voted in favor of this draft resolution. We co-penned it together with the elected members of this Council because we believe that it is time for this Council to speak with one voice, to take decisive action to address the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. We regret that it was not possible today. Around this table, we've been entrusted with the responsibility to maintain international peace and security. We cannot stand by while this relentless suffering continues to unfold in real time in front of our eyes. We need to act, to show leadership, and to deliver on that mandate. Madam President, this resolution contained 3 necessary demands: demand for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire, demand for the immediate, dignified, and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas and other groups, and demand for the immediate and unconditional lifting of all restrictions on the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Denmark wholeheartedly supports and reiterates these demands. International law is clear. Humanitarian aid must never be politicized and used as a political bargaining chip or as a part of a military strategy. It must flow freely and safely to all those in need, in line with international humanitarian law and the humanitarian principles. Madam President, we are under no illusions. This draft resolution was not perfect. Denmark regrets that the draft resolution did not condemn the heinous terrorist attacks by Hamas and other terrorist groups on October 7th, and we reiterate our firm condemnation of Hamas' despicable acts. It does not change, however, our support for the resolution as a whole, which we had deeply hoped would be adopted today. We thus remain resolute in our call for an immediate and lasting ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and for an urgent lifting of all restrictions on humanitarian aid. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. The United Kingdom voted in favour of this resolution today because the intolerable situation in Gaza needs to end. We are determined to see an end to this war, secure the release of the hostages held by Hamas, and alleviate the catastrophic humanitarian situation for Palestinians in Gaza. This Israeli government's decisions to expand its military operations in Gaza and severely restrict aid are unjustifiable, disproportionate, and counterproductive, and the UK completely opposes them. The Israeli government says it has opened up aid access with its new system. But Palestinians, desperate to feed their families, have been killed as they try to reach the very few aid sites that have been permitted by Israel. This is inhumane. We support the UN's call for immediate and independent investigation into these events and for perpetrators to be held accountable. Israel needs to end its restrictions on aid now. Let the UN and humanitarians do their job to save lives, reduce suffering, and maintain dignity. President, we regret that the Council was unable to reach a consensus today, but we remain committed to the vision of this text. We will continue to strongly support the efforts led by the United States, Qatar, and Egypt to secure an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. A ceasefire is the best way to secure the release of all remaining hostages and achieve a long-term political solution. And we repeat our condemnation of the heinous attack by Hamas on the 7th of October and demand that it release all the hostages immediately and unconditionally. Hamas can have no role in the future governance of Gaza. A two-state solution is the only way to bring the long-lasting peace, stability, and security that both Israelis and Palestinians deserve. We welcome France and Saudi Arabia's leadership in chairing an international conference later this month. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. It is a sad day, another low in the history of this august body that is entrusted with primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Pakistan deeply regrets the failure of this Council to adopt the draft resolution tabled by the 10 elected members, and which was an effort to address one of the most grave and sustained humanitarian catastrophes of our time. Once again, the elected members have shown that they are here, ready and willing to fully assume the responsibilities that have been entrusted to them by being members of this Council on behalf of the general membership. Madam President, we are appalled that this Council once again stands immobilized in the face of mass suffering, atrocity, and unfolding tragedy. The veto cast today sends an extremely dangerous message that the lives of over 2 million Palestinians, besieged, starved, and relentlessly bombarded, are dispensable. This will remain not only a moral stain on the conscience of this Council, but a fateful moment of political abdication that will reverberate for generations. We have heard yet again the familiar refrain that this is not the right time and that space must be given to ongoing negotiations. But how much more space do we need? Space filled with rubble, graves, and the anguished cries of children. How much more time do we need? What amount of evidence do we need before we say enough and put to stop this barbarity and savagery perpetrated under a brutal occupation? While this Council deliberated and delayed, Gaza has been decimated. This is no longer a humanitarian crisis. It is a collapse of humanity and of international law and all that this Council is supposed to stand for. As the President of the ICRC noted, Gaza is worse than hell on earth. Over 54,000 civilians have been killed, among them 28,000 women and girls, and 18,000 children. In the last 24 hours alone, nearly 100 Palestinians have been killed and more than 400 wounded. Entire neighborhoods lie in ruin. Famine stalks the land. Disease and despair now spread more quickly than any aid can arrive. And while Gaza bleeds and this Council has been muzzled, the world has spoken. The International Court of Justice has issued binding provisional measures. The General Assembly has adopted numerous resolutions. The United Nations, humanitarian organizations, global civil society, people on the streets across the world, and increasingly voices from within Israel itself have recognized that what is unfolding is not merely war, but the systematic destruction of a people, war crimes, genocide. Madam President, in one of the most chilling developments, Palestinian civilians have been shot and killed while attempting to access food. And we think that to kill innocent civilians for seeking bread and water is not only a war crime, it is a tragic indictment of a system that criminalizes survival and militarizes humanitarian aid in flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. Aid dropped from the sky or delivered under armed escort is not a solution. It is a spectacle. And to defend these arrangements is not pragmatism. It is a moral failure. It is totally unacceptable. The draft resolution before us today was objective, balanced, principled, and rooted firmly in the UN Charter and the most basic tenets of humanitarian law. It asks for no more than what any human being deserves: food for starving children, medicine for the wounded, shelter for the displaced, the right to life, an end to killing, therefore. And it also asks for the release of the hostages. And it is also supporting the efforts that are underway to bring about a ceasefire. That even such modest, urgent demands could not pass underscores the depth of this Council's dysfunction. Let us be clear. This failure will not go down in records as a mere procedural footnote. It will be remembered as a complicity, a green light for continued annihilation, a moment where the entire world was expecting action, but yet again this Council was blocked and prevented by one member from carrying out its responsibility. Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering support for the Palestinian people in their just struggle for dignity, justice, and self-determination. We reiterate our calls for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire, full, unfettered humanitarian access, and an end to the inhumane blockade of Gaza. A just, lasting, and comprehensive solution to the question of Palestine, rooted in international law and based on the establishment of a viable, contiguous, and sovereign Palestinian state on pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital in accordance with relevant UN resolutions. History will judge how each member of this Council chose to respond at this hour of moral reckoning. Together with the majority of the Council members, Pakistan stands firmly on the side of humanity, of legality, and justice. We urge the holdouts to do the same before Gaza becomes not only a wound on the world's conscience, but a permanent scar on the credibility of this Council. And President, but we don't end here. We are not going to lay idle. We are going to continue and redouble our efforts for the cause of peace in line with our responsibility as a responsible member of this Council. We will continue to call for accountability and an end to impunity that Israel, the occupying power, continues to enjoy. We shall continue to recall and remind that the root cause of the problem, the challenges confronting the region, is the decades-long illegal Israeli occupation of the Arab lands, including the occupied Palestinian territories. The way forward, in our view, is in addressing and tackling that root cause head-on. That is by ending the occupation. It is not by mercilessly and mindlessly killing the Palestinians, who are the oppressed people in this case, or by making them starve, or by trying to evict them from their lands, or by suppressing their voice, or by denying them their legitimate and internationally recognized right to self-determination. Because we know that that's not going to work. For the brave, dignified, and resilient people of Palestine are not going to give up. They're not going to give up their right, and they're not alone. The entire international community is on their side. That support is going to be evident later this month at the General Assembly, not this Council, but at the General Assembly, where the international conference, the high-level conference on Palestine and the two-state solution is going to be held. And we are certain that it will be a resounding call for the Palestinian rights and irreversible path to two-state solution and Palestinian statehood and full membership of the United Nations. We shall revert to the Council as and when required, as has been said by the distinguished representative of Algeria, and we expect that the Council will shoulder its responsibility towards Palestine and in the interest of maintaining peace and security in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, allow me to congratulate you, Madam President, on your assumption of the presidency of the Council this month. I also commend the leadership of the Greek presidency in the able manner they have guided the Council's work last month. Somalia has voted in favor of the draft resolution presented today. We express our sincere appreciation to all Council members who supported this timely and important resolution. This short and concise resolution addresses the long-standing catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. It demands an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire and the immediate and unconditional lifting of all restrictions on humanitarian aid. As we are all aware, the humanitarian situation in Gaza continues to deteriorate rapidly. Civilians are dying, in particular, women and children, from acute shortages of food, water, and essential medical supplies. The risk of famine is growing day by day, and entire communities are on the brink of collapse. We have all heard the many alarming briefings by the Secretary General and humanitarian community on the ground. The international community must not turn away from this unfolding human tragedy. Somalia regrets that despite the overwhelming support for this purely humanitarian resolution, the Council was unable to reach consensus. We underscore that the resolution's aim was solely to elevate the immense suffering of civilians in Gaza and to ensure full, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access in line with international humanitarian law and humanitarian principles. Somalia remains firmly committed to continue its efforts together with Council members and the wider UN membership to support the Palestinians to exercise their inalienable rights to live in dignity and to govern their sovereign land and build the future of their children in an independent state with Al-Quds al-Sharif at its capital in line with UN Security Council relevant resolutions. We urge Israel as the occupying force to fulfill its obligation under international law to ensure that humanitarian assistance reaches those in desperate need without delay or hindrance, and to end its occupation of Palestinian land. This is the only path to sustainable peace in the Middle East and for the future of many children to come. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Somalia for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of China.
Madam Chair, at the outset, let me congratulate Guyana on assuming the presidency of the Security Council this month, and Greece on successfully completing presidency of the Council last month. China is deeply disappointed by the result of today's vote. The draft resolution on the humanitarian situation in Gaza tabled by the E10 of the Security Council clearly calls for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and lifting of the blockade on humanitarian supplies therein. These are the most pressing demands of the people in Gaza who are struggling amidst death and despair, and they reflect the overwhelming voice of the international community. The United States has once again abused its veto power, extinguishing the glimmer of hope for the people of Gaza and ruthlessly continuing to leave over 2 million people in darkness. It must face questioning from the international community. People cannot help but ask, where is fairness and justice? For more than 600 days, over 54,000 people in Gaza have lost their lives. Israel continues to escalate its offensive and blockade, turning Gaza into a living hell. Innocent civilians are killed in the conflict every day, while a large portion of the population is on the brink of famine. The United Nations has clearly pointed out that the aid delivery mechanism promoted by the US and Israel violates the principles of impartiality, independence, and neutrality. Recently, there have been repeated incidents of civilian casualties near distribution sites, and this mechanism has even become a death trap. The brutal facts have clearly shown that military means are not the solution. This conflict has long exceeded the limits of a hostage rescue operation. Israel must immediately cease military operations and fully restore access for humanitarian supplies. People cannot help but ask, where is the international rule of law? Since the outbreak of the conflict, we have witnessed the weaponization of humanitarian aid, the targeting of civilian infrastructure such as schools and hospitals, and the ruthless killing of journalists and humanitarian workers. Israel's actions have crossed every red line of the international humanitarian law and seriously violated Security Council and General Assembly resolutions, as well as the provisional measures ordered by the ICJ. Yet, due to the shielding by one country, these violations have not been stopped or held accountable. Observing international humanitarian law is an obligation all parties must fulfill. It is not optional. Any double standards or selective application will only erode the foundation of international rule of law and must be firmly rejected. People cannot help but ask, where is the authority of the Security Council? As the primary body responsible for maintaining international peace and security, the Council has been striving to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza and has long reached overwhelming consensus on ceasefire and humanitarian issues. Today's vote result once again exposes that the root cause of the Council's inability to quell the conflict in Gaza is the repeated obstruction by the US, who has vetoed the Council's request for ceasefire multiple times. And because of its shielding of Israel, several resolutions adopted by the Council have not been effectively implemented. Claims that Security Council action would interfere with diplomatic efforts are completely untenable. As long as diplomatic efforts are genuinely aimed at peace, the actions of the Council will only provide strong support. Madam President, the international community will never cease its efforts to pursue fairness and justice, uphold the international rule of law, and safeguard the authority of the Council. A veto by a single permanent member cannot stop the march toward peace. We urge the US to face up to its responsibilities as a permanent Council member. abandon political calculations and adopt a just and responsible attitude in supporting the Council to take all necessary actions. China stands ready to work with the international community to help end the conflict in Gaza, alleviate the humanitarian disaster, implement the two-state solution, and ultimately achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution of the Palestinian question. Thank you, Madam President.
Of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, we thank the elected members of the Council for the courage they have shown in their efforts to advance a very timely and useful draft resolution on which we had a vote today. We note in particular that the sponsors managed to, in a very short time, prepare a draft of a genuinely balanced and strong document which is aimed at an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and the lifting of the humanitarian blockade from Gaza. In current tragic circumstances, that is the bare minimum, or even we can call it the first aid kit that the international community has to provide in order to ease the suffering of peaceful Palestinians. Unfortunately, yet once again, the Council did not arrive at an outcome acceptable to all. And it could not adopt the kind of product which would have spared Gaza and the entire region from sliding further into chaos. Yet another opportunity was missed to show that the Security Council is ready to shoulder its responsibility for maintaining international peace and security in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has now lasted 8 decades. And I think that we all today had another opportunity to see who really wants peace in the Middle East and who wants to continue playing political games. Under current conditions, we place particular hopes on the upcoming, this month, high-level conference on the Middle East settlement, which is to take place in New York and to be co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France. It's important to make sure that it has a concrete outcome and aims at breathing new life into the idea of a two-state solution. For that purpose, the international community needs to display collective will and do its utmost to make sure that conditions are created, the conditions which are needed to resume the peace process. And we intend to have a most active participation in the conference. I thank you.
Representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. For more than 600 days, especially since the breakdown of the ceasefire in March, Palestinian civilians in Gaza have been struggling to survive through the most unendurable hardships. We witness every day on our screens the agonizing killing of innocent Palestinians, including children, caused by incessant airstrikes and live fire. Denial and restriction to the life-saving aid, including food and medicine, are exacerbating the catastrophic situation in Gaza. We have seen the chaos and violence at the aid distribution sites since the new aid plan began its operations last week. We cannot support a scheme that does not prioritize the need of civilians, nor is underpinned by the principles of humanity, neutrality, independence, and impartiality. Madam President, we are also extremely concerned about the horrific conditions that Israeli hostages, still brutally held by Hamas, are forced to endure since the horrific terrorist attacks by Hamas on October 7, which we condemn in the strongest terms. But as we have witnessed for the last 3 months, blocking or throttling humanitarian aid for millions of people cannot ensure the safe return of hostages. Based on these deep concerns, the Republic of Korea participated with other elected members of the Security Council in tabling this draft resolution demanding the immediate and unconditional lifting of all restrictions on the entry and distribution of humanitarian aid in Gaza. Today's draft resolution is not contrary to the steadfast and unwavering support of the international community, including the Republic of Korea, for the persistent efforts by mediating countries, the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt, to secure an immediate ceasefire and release of hostages. While it is regrettable that the draft resolution was not adopted today, we believe that its wide support proved again the position of the vast majority of the international community, unequivocally demanding unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid to Palestinian civilians in dire need. Considering the urgency of the harrowing situation in Gaza, we desperately hope that the extreme suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza will end as soon as possible. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam President. We all know the tragedy that's taking place under our very eyes in Gaza. Not very many words are needed. We voted in support of the resolution, and we thank the elected members of the Security Council for having prepared the draft. And we deeply regret the fact that it was not possible to adopt it today. The Council was prevented from shouldering its responsibility, despite the fact that most of us seem to be converging on one view. We reiterate our appeal for a permanent and immediate ceasefire, providing humanitarian